This scientist believes that man holds the secret of anti-gravity and can produce flying saucers at will. We interviewed him at a private house in Perth.
Well, originally I didn't start to investigate UFO phenomena. I suppose I started studying the physics that led me to this point, 62 to 64, at the United States Air Force Academy as a cadet in a special government program. As you're aware, the Air Force Academy is outside NORAD in the Colorado Mountains. It's a few miles up the hill from it. And I was trained there with 180 some odd other characters to do research in areas of electrogravitics later. We were programmed with libraries of information by slides flashed up on a wall at the rate of 200 pages a second. We couldn't even read them, but they were being implanted in our minds subliminally. It was a very classified project, and for the most part of it, while we were being programmed, we weren't aware of what was going on. I mean, we had normal classes in physics and calculus and this sort of things, but this stuff was being programmed in so that we had to assimilate it or bring it to our conscious mind over the months and years that followed in dreams and kind of daydream periods during the day when we're awake. But I left the academy in 64. I had a top secret security clearance with the government, and then eventually that lapsed to secret. And I did a bit of time in the reserves, Air Force Reserves, with the Strategic Air Command outside of Fort Worth. And then proceeded to do private research in this electrogravitics, thinking that I had cracked the secret of anti-gravity all by myself, and jumping up and down in my father's labs and mines in Dallas. And one day I was approached by the government and a kind of an emissary from Dr. Edward Teller's office, Dr. James R. Maxfield. When he told me what I'd been doing in my lab and the details of stuff I haven't even written down or told anybody. He knew, and he had other people like myself sponsored in this kind of research around the country, and that was the first time that I knew that the U.S. government was actively involved, had been, and was still actively involved in the control of gravity with electricity.
And who did this man represent?
Well, his job, as his job qualification is he's the director of the James R. Maxfield Radiation Research Clinic in Dallas, Texas. The same Maxfield that invented the irradiated thread treatment for cancer of various organs. If you look at his little dossier that's in the Who's Who, you find that he was on the President's National Security Advisory Board, which is really a rather important nog in the U.S. intelligence system. Kissinger would have been on the same rank. You find that he was closely affiliated with Dr. Edward Teller, who was the kind of dubbed the father of the hydrogen bomb project in the United States. But he told me that Dr. Teller was the head of anti-gravity research there, had been, I don't know whether he still is, and that he had worked on a similar project with him. In fact, the letter that you and I viewed earlier from my files from Dr. Maxfield to this government and to Sir John Williams did mention that fact, if you recall.
So what happened to you then?
Well, they suggested that I finish my research in Australia. I wasn't enthralled with the idea, but Dr. Maxfield told me that I would be paid to come down and that I was to call the Australian consulate in San Francisco and ask for Bob Gray and tell him that, in these words, that I was a member of Maxfield's party. At the same time that I was being approached by Dr. Maxfield's party to come down here and finish my research, I'd been approached already by the FBI and was working for them as an informant. It doesn't mean that you're a trained agent. It just means that you're somewhere in industry where they need someone. They don't have time to get them in there.
Informing on what?
Well, the particular thing I was to inform on was the comings and goings of various people from the White House to my group of companies in Dallas, and also their connection to Israel and the Middle East political situation. And I did my job rather well, just reporting who came and went and various amounts of money and things that I did know that transferred. There were about 700 or 800 of us in the United States that were employed by the FBI in this manner. I didn't take money. I took information in exchange. But at any rate, they came and told me, the FBI did, that I had been compromised by a break-in in one of their agencies in Louisiana or someplace like that, and that I was going to get shot. And which they'd explained to me at the beginning, the risks involved, but I thought they were joking until I went back to the office, the computer division there, in Dallas, and was sacked, given 30 minutes to clean up my desk and leave, and by an old friend of mine. And so he accused me of being the head of a big spy ring and all kinds of stuff. And so I left. And in fact, I didn't have my last meeting with the FBI, and I didn't have my last meeting with Dr. Maxfield. I just bundled a few things and the family into a plane and headed for Australia. I did make it, and I was quite glad to, and kept a very low profile for 7 months. But I continued to do my research, and I wrote Dr. Maxfield a letter, and that was perhaps my mistake. I said, look, I've done it. I've figured out the wave equation that we were looking for. And again, in my ignorance, I didn't realize how much work had already been done and gone before me. I was just kind of on the periphery or the edge of this whole development.
That's a device to be able to make things like flying saucers fly, is it?
Yes. Also, it's a device to store energy in the form of motion, like of a small star or a big atom. It's called, this is a long word, an MHD plasma, magnetohydrodynamic plasma, like ball lightning. And it contains itself. But it's a way to turn all sorts of electricity into a high-voltage battery. Now, this would have been an immediate solution for the Middle East oil blockade at that time. Now, I wrote the letter in good faith, trying to say, look, we can stop the threat of war in the Middle East by using this as an alternate energy source. It's very portable, it's non-polluting. It had some byproduct radiation problems, but things we could solve. It would be cleaner than fission or fusion. Now, that's when people here in this country, at the Aeronautical Research Labs, politicians started to get a hold of me. ASIO contacted me. Good grief. An ad infinitum chain of intelligence people, including 2 CIA people from the States. And then the FBI eventually started looking for me in this country, and that again was after the intelligence war over there, after Hoover died. And I was unable to finish my research in this country. In fact, I met many dead ends in government departments and research facilities where they told me privately, like Dr. Tom Keeble in the Aeronautical Research Labs. He told me, yes, we know about the flying saucers your countrymen have built, and in England and in Canada. And in fact, we have film records of them here in the RAAF files. I said,
I want to stop you there.
Yeah.
Are you saying, Stan, that there are such things as, let's call them flying saucers, but they are built on Earth?
Yes, that doesn't mean that I rule out the possibility of other flying devices or intelligent beings visiting the planet either from the oceanic bottoms or deeper areas or from other areas in space. But I am positive that we have the technology, I can even name you the companies and people involved, in making high-speed electric aircraft that do look, strange enough, like a saucer.
What sort of proof can one furnish for that?
Oh, good grief. The briefcase I've got down here is full of documented evidence that is not all secret. If you go to the records of the New York Herald Tribune, the newspaper is now defunct. I think it's being stored in the Wisconsin State Historical Society. And look for November 20th, 21st, and 22nd, 1955. There are 3 articles in a series on anti-gravity and the various companies and people involved in the research in the United States, Japan, Europe. The list is like a who's who of nuclear physics. It was written by Ansel E. Talbert, the science and aviation editor for the New York Herald Tribune at that time. You can look there. You can look in the Electrical Engineering Index for that period between 55 and 58.
That's a long time ago.
Yes. 57, about March, the security curtain went down. And there were, at that time, over 100 published universities and organizations, including the Gravity Research Foundation, which is still operational in Gravity Village in the United States. There were over 100 of these things operating to develop gravity, the control of it as a power source and communication and locomotion, etc. Now, in 57, the blanket went down on security, and there was no more reported news on it to say either that it was a dead-end research avenue, that everybody had stopped working on it, or that it was highly successful and there had been a few breakthroughs. There was just nothing. It went quiet. And if you go back in the period and look, you will see that for a number of years after 57, there was no mention of this sort of research in print. Behind the scenes, there was a lot of discussion, and even MGM Studios made the movie The Forbidden Planet, revealing at that time a lot, as though it were fiction, of the technology and why it had to be covered up. Now, I think Walter Pidgeon starred in that, and he did a good job. basically, they decided that mankind wasn't ready for it yet because he proceeded to misuse it like he had the atom or the hydrogen bomb. Now, recent evidence is very hard to get. However, in this country, a little leak occurred over here with William H. Martin in the Nation Review. May of 1973 or 4, I believe. I can't remember now. He published an article on Pine Gap and how Nixon had intended to use it in 1975 to solve the energy crisis by announcing a new method of electromagnetic propulsion, which would be based from the Pine Gap facility. Well, now, from my knowledge of the technology, what small knowledge I do have from my little viewpoint, Pine Gap has all of the inherent descriptions necessary for a high voltage, low frequency power broadcast station to broadcast electricity to various receivers like cars and submarines and aircraft that are tuned to that power station. It's just a more efficient version of the Exmouth facility here up the Northwest Cape.
So it's right here on our doorstep, is it?
Oh, yes. The big question you have to ask yourself, Guy, is why would such a thing be kept secret? I mean, people at the levels that are covering it up, I know some of them personally, and they aren't, in my opinion, villains. They're very sincere humanists. They are trying to solve planet Earth, trying to bring unity their way.
You speak of them as though they were collective rather than singular. Is that right?
Yes. Dr. Keeble, as I mentioned before, in Melbourne at the Aeronautical Research Lab, tried to explain to me about they. He mentioned we as though it was they. An organization, a group of scientists, academics, industrialists. He couldn't be exact. Now, he never put a name to it, but I said, well, do you mean like a club? And he said, yes, but no. We are aware of these problems, and we're trying to solve them in the best way we know how. Granted, there are things that should be kept from the public eye until we do have some sort of a unity in the world economy. But I think the manner in which it's been gone about is most unfortunate. I would not have taken the same tack myself. The power politics involved in keeping the secrets that we now have across the planet have allowed, well, in my opinion, groups that aren't capable of handling control of the planet to take power.
So what basically you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we've got a situation where you maintain various countries have perhaps a top-level intelligentsia who are in possession of a common set of facts which transpose country boundaries now, and it's a worldwide sort of thing.
In Russia, involved in this would be the Russian physicist who's been in the news recently with the civil rights movements, Dr. Andrei Sakharov. Also in his country, an ex-KGB agent, some 25 years, but a physicist, and a former hydrogen bomb project development engineer, physicist, is Dr. Bruno Pontecorvo, working on gravitic engines in Siberia. As I told you, in the States, it was Dr. Teller and affiliates there. I don't know all of their names. But these people have all been working together as scientists who go above governments. And look, they're sincere. I can't blame them for doing this. It's just that they have lost control of what they tried to set up.
Has that association got a name?
I don't think so. When I worked with the FBI, there was a political and financial institution that I was ordered to investigate with many other agents, and it was called the Illuminati, which is a general term meaning the enlightened or the wise ones. The investigation of this led me to the Council on Foreign Relations and to the Club of Rome, which are linked by joint directorships under Carol Wilson. This is, again, another tale, but you put yourself in the scientist's position in the mid-50s. What you see is that you've got a technology that, if announced to the public, would cause mass reactions in the economy, in social moves, in cultural reactions that could probably bring about the demise of the whole human civilization. A simple example would be this. As a scientist, you come out in the mid-50s and you say, we have a process which will allow us to get rid of tires, allow us to get rid of the petrol engine, hence the petrol, hence all the dependent industries. It'll be available for you in 24 months' time. and it only cost you $3,000 or $4,000. Now, what guy in his right mind would buy a new petrol engine car if he could have one of the new ones in 2 years that don't need roads and run on electricity and no petrol necessary? They'd all stop their buying trends, which would then collapse the economies that would be building the other one in 24 months. If you had a central world authority, like Dr. Pache's Club of Rome group want, then if you announced, when you controlled all the nations and the economies, if you announced and said, we've got a new car that does this, nobody'd panic, because they know that if their industry became redundant, they would be retrained and paid while they're doing it in some other support industry. We don't have that facility on the planet at the moment, because we're greatly disordered, and many of the cultures fight against each other. Scientists, industrialists, engineers found this problem in the mid-50s. Now, we're playing their part. So we sit here and we say, how do we get world unity? The United Nations, the League of Nations had failed. You couldn't get any 2 or 3 of them to agree to turn their sovereignty over to a third party. You couldn't come out and field an army from the United Nations or League of Nations or anywhere, even a corporate army, and tell the people of Earth you're taking over, as some people have suggested the multinationals might do. You can't do that because the mass resistance would be worse than the French resistance to Hitler. It would destroy the unity they were trying to get. So by peaceful discussion over the conference table and by force, it wasn't possible. Yet as the scientific community looked at this new technology, it reached into all human endeavor, touched many points of life. They said, look, if we develop this, completely develop it into a social, technological, integrated model, away from the rest of people in islands or in back rooms, however we do it, keep it quiet even from the politicians. At some point later, after 1956, 57, 58, some point later we'll have it ready to announce to the world as a global system. Then all we've got to do is figure out how to convince them to give it a try in unity.
Right, well this was 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Are we now saying that this is approaching the time?
I think we are, and it's not like some prophecy or something. It's just looking at events in the media. For the first 10 years of that 20-year period you're talking about, people that saw UFOs or flying saucers were nuts. They were played that way in the media. It was a bad thing to even talk about it. Now, toward the end of this 20-year period, if you see one, you're a great guy in the neighborhood. Everybody wants to talk to you. Everybody wants to know you. Pilots, physicists, all kinds of people are coming forward now. Presidents, dictators. Yes, I've seen a UFO. Now, to me, the shift in the public conditioning medium is to get people ready for the announcement of the new technology. Now, scientists aren't going to come out. Industrialists aren't going to come out and say, okay, here it is, children. Here you go. The new model for planet Earth using this technology must be independent of any established government or order. It can't be Russian or capitalist or dictatorial. It's got to be independent. And the only way you can do it is an external culture, whether it be called from the ocean bottom, whether it's from the Bermuda Triangle, or whether it's from outer space. They have got to see it in this way so that for a short time the masses will overlook their cultural differences to unite, to form this one world order. Then, after 7 or 8 years, if you can hold the ruse that long, you explain to them, this is how we brought peace. I still maintain, I don't think that it'll work, because at the top, these organizations are fighting.
I'd like to ask you a direct question. You work in the field of anti-gravitics. Could you make what we call a flying saucer?
Oh, yes, with adequate funds and time, sure. I'd still be doing it for the research organizations if I hadn't differed in philosophy. That's where I got in trouble, because I stood up and said, why are you doing this? And it wasn't for me to know. UFOs, if they don't exist, or these electric flying saucers, if they don't exist in our current technology, I'll give it to the world. I'll be a hero, but I'll tell you right now, I don't need to do that. It's already done. This does not mean that in the past, before 47, 49, whenever the first flying saucers were supposedly sighted on this planet, does not mean that the time before that was to be explained by Earth technology. It wasn't. Even back in the Bible, in Moses' encounter with God in the flaming bush, and don't walk on this ground with your shoes on, take one off. It sounded like he was in a field at any rate. Ezekiel's flaming chariot. You go back thousands of years and you find we had encounters with things that could only be explained in their own words as being from the heavens. In the last 2,000 years after the birth of Christ, we find that these encounter cases were, many of them more bizarre, where they didn't have the same good side to them. People suffered headaches, some cases disappearance, livestock were cut apart and the blood drained out of them. You see it quite frequently now. It seems as though the more recent contact cases from these extraterrestrial origins have been malevolent or bad, whereas the Old Testament versions were benevolent or good. We do have the technology now to give UFOs, or the electric flying saucers, to the world. It is when I say we, it's a joint scientific effort from many of the countries of the world: Russia, the United States, England, Canada. Now, it is just the manner in which to announce it. What we have here is the tip of the iceberg with the anti-gravity device, the flying saucer we've been discussing. There are many other things that the technology offers. New medicine, which allows limbs to be regrown through electric field processes and plasma research, bioplasma, the tissue restructuring. We have devices which can transmit power around the entire planet without wires, so that you can tune to electricity stations like you would tune to a radio station, but it would run your house or your caravan or wherever you are in the bush or the water or the air. We have theory now, but I don't think any practical devices that would allow us to go faster than the speed of light and traverse many light years of distance in a very, very short time, using the same technique that we used to break the sound barrier, where we warp the shock wave. Perhaps this is where Star Trek developed their terminology, warp factor 1 and warp factor 2. We have devices to make weapons, which is an unfortunate thing. It could be used for other applications, but in transmitting power in little hand or backpack units, or even on tops of the decks of ships that shoot smoke rings or charged particle rings like smoke rings at targets long distances away, and strike them with enough force to electrocute or burn the target, depending upon what frequencies are used. There are numerous things. There is even a way to use this process to control minds at a distance of 10 to 15 miles from a central transmitter, where people aren't even aware of it during their sleep, somewhat like post-hypnotic suggestion. This, in the wrong hands, is not a good tool.
A lot of folks have asked how I got started in the UFO research business. It's kind of hard to pick a starting point, like everyone else, since the mid-50s, when UFOs became a thing of the press. I was very interested. I spent some time at the Air Force Academy in Colorado as a cadet, and part of my physics science manual there did give us a little bit of official Air Force jargon about how to debunk UFO sightings and this sort of thing. So as early as about 1964 at the Academy, I was aware that there were official moves at hand to debunk UFOs, whether they were real or not. So after I got out of the Academy, I proceeded to go into normal business in the computing game in Dallas, Texas. As part of my civilian work, I was approached by the FBI to do some work to report on some chaps that I was seeing in business. And the method of payment that we worked out was that I would exchange information for information. And my information was I wanted to know more about the UFO cover-up and about something called Operation Illuminati that J. Edgar Hoover was quite keen on at the time. All of these things I have written about in my first book, the Cosmic Conspiracy. But in summary, I found that there was a government, what appeared to be a government-level cover-up to the UFO situation, and I determined to find out more as a civilian about where these things came from, if they were man-made, if they were extraterrestrial, if they were here, why were they being hidden from us? I couldn't really understand why. I got very close to developing a propulsion system for a primitive plasma flying saucer in Dallas at my own laboratory as a result of the research I was involved in. And through a very long series of events, I was introduced to a man in Dallas, Dr. James R. Maxfield, who seemed to know an awful lot about the flying saucer business from an official U.S. government point of view. As time went on, I learned that Dr. Maxfield, because he told me himself in his offices, was an associate of the father of the hydrogen bomb, Teller, Dr. Edward Teller, and that they'd worked together at Livermore Radiation Labs. They'd gone down to the South Pole on various excursions. They'd been under the pole in submarines together. And Dr. Maxfield informed me in one of our last meetings in Dallas that he and Dr. Teller had overseen some 52 projects similar to my own research in the United States since the early 50s. And he knew before I even told him, that Maxfield knew before I even told him what I was doing in my own research in my laboratory, virtually what I was thinking almost, and suggested that I finish my research here in this country, in Australia. So they arranged things for me through the Australian consulate and in San Francisco, and I was whisked away to Australia. I left out a number of things that are germane, but it's for the convenience of time. I'll let you read that in the book somewhere. But once I got to Australia, I was able to find out a lot more information on the cover-up than I was in the States. I suppose, and I don't know this for a fact, I suppose that's because the United States government is so much in control of the media and people trying to leak things to the public. Over here it wasn't quite so tight, and I was able to find old yellowed and dog-eared copies of information and data that dated back to the early 50s that people here had collected, that libraries had back in the back room under dust. And then I started to write letters to Europe and to England, the United States, to various people and places to find out more about the cover-up and who was making these saucers. Now, the first book I wrote about the man-made flying saucers because I was able to document enough to prove that we do have man-made flying saucer technology on the planet, to my satisfaction anyway. In fact, to the satisfaction of probably 500,000 people who've read the book now. The other source of flying saucers were non-human. And in my first book I only put about 1 or 2 sentences which I acknowledged that there were others not man-made, which I would discuss in the sequel. Now, I've just released that sequel book where I do discuss the encounters with mankind a long time ago, probably 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, where we had extraterrestrials visiting Earth and actually crossbreeding with us. So all of the things I have done have been triggered by previous events and research that I've been able to discover, and also by people spilling the beans on their department or their boss, or sometimes by disinformation leaked out by various governments to me directly. I certainly have had a chance to discuss this business of UFOs and extraterrestrials with some very unusual and very prominent people, if I were ever to name them. And it's mainly, I don't name them for any sinister reason. It's just that they are interested at a government level personally, but are not involved in the cover-up and are just wanting to know what's going on because they get little whispers themselves. In trying to understand why any government would withhold the technology we had, I came into an argument with a man by the name of Sir John Williams in Melbourne, Victoria, here in Australia. He was my contact and my prominent man in this area in Australia. He was my introduced contact from Dr. Maxfield's people. And I argued with him that we should release this technology because they were trying to underwrite my research in this country into flying saucer propulsion, not UFOs but flying saucers, because we knew what they were. And I got cranky when I wanted to make things public and to tell people that there was a cover-up in the States, because rather naively I thought that Australia was a long way from America and from Europe, and it wasn't really part of the cover-up, and we could get away with a lot down here. But much to my surprise, it was probably at the forefront of the cover-up. And Sir John and Sir Henry Somerset and a few of the others that were involved in that side of it, quick smart cut me off from their organization and disavowed knowledge of my project because they were afraid that I was going to find out enough to be a nuisance. And in retrospect, I mean, some of what they were keeping secret, I think I would probably have done the same thing in their position because of the extenuating circumstances. Again, as I've printed in my first book, a secret is not always sinister. There are very good reasons, because of public panic and reactions that people exhibit in times of crisis, that you don't tell the public everything. In fact, while we're recording this, this is in 1991, the early part of the year, in fact before January the 15th. And Saddam Hussein, we don't know what he's about to do at this point in time, but the entire world is standing on the edge of World War III, or the greatest peace treaty we've ever seen. And all of these things that we see in the press now then do relate to covered up technology. There are a number of things about the U.S. military technology and their allies' technology that have not been made public. I get kind of tickled when people tell me, did you read in the paper today that the U.S. is going to use its new secret weapon such and such over in this part of Saudi Arabia to attack Saddam? And I think, well, yeah, I did read that, but do you believe it? I mean, Saddam reads the newspaper too. He's going to read the secret reports, and mainly these are things put into the press to gain public support for spending or various other things that are necessary at government level to do what they're really going to do. So secret is not always sinister. It's clever. It's psychological warfare to try to win for your side, whatever side you're on. The cover-up of the UFO situation, in my opinion, is more than just a cover-up by the United States or by Russia or by Europe. I have had the privilege of having information leaked to me by a number of, I guess you would call them ex-intelligence members of British intelligence and Japanese intelligence, who have told me more about the so-called cover-up. And one thing that sticks prominently in my mind is that around 1957, about March of that year, there were over 100 companies, universities, individuals publishing openly in Europe or in Japan and the United States on their own research into electrogravitic or anti-gravity propulsion for aircraft. At the end of that month, now this has been going on for 2 or 3 years, it was very hot property, this electrogravitics. At the end of that month, no more publications were seen in any of these things across the world. I checked through the old records and annals, and in 1 month, something or someone came across all of the governments that were actively involved in researching this electrogravitics and put a clamp on them, whether they be Russian, American, Japanese, Norwegian, whatever. They were all quietened. Now my contacts, 3 of them in particular, 3 of them in particular from Europe, explained to me that since World War II, that there had been a unit formed in Europe which had American, Canadian, Russian, Yugoslavian, German, seems like I've forgotten one, but they had all of these people, Russian Americans combined, had scientists from these groups working in underground labs, bases, on developing not new technology for flying saucers, but new industrial processes and complexes to make them. And there's a difference between that and actually building the saucer, or designing it or researching it. And these contacts explained it to me. If we didn't have the technology, you could understand you'd have secret labs to research and development, various ways you might make a flying saucer work. But that was not the case after World War II. This new unit, or intelligence and research unit that was set up in Europe, Saudi Arabia, and various other countries, in Norway, would get briefcases delivered to them by men in suits, young men in suits. These thin briefcases would have blueprints in them. And in these blueprints, there would be instructions. Here is how you make an XYZ ray gun, flying saucer, a plasma cutter, whatever. It needs this kind of material, it needs these kind of components and these voltage levels and this frequencies. We know this will work. You go and develop the tools to make and manufacture these for us. So it wasn't design them. Someone was giving them an encyclopedia of new super high-tech devices. Now, my sources were never able to identify them. In fact, one of them, a woman we call the accountant, said that in a quip. She said, for all she knew, they could have been little green men at the top handing out the details. And I said, are you saying that? I mean, do you have a positive reason to say that? And she said, no, just laughed. Said, however, I was aware of the capture of 2 living short little creatures in Great Britain off the coast of it after World War II in the early 50s, when a craft crashed near a village of about 1,200 people. And apparently the little beings lived for a number of years in captivity with the British wing of the unit. Okay, so we've looked at a global organization here that seems to have taken over 100 or more university research groups, countries, and people and corporations. Who is this group? Who was it? I don't know. I guess that it was obviously some group that had more technology than all the rest, and such technology that within the space of a month they could infiltrate every intelligence and every security system we had in any country, and deny them any more publicity to the public, shut them up and make them secret and take them off to some other place. I suspect. So I don't know that a one world order as such, as I've often talked about, is in existence at the moment. It's certainly trying to emerge, and even George Bush, President Bush, has said that he wants to see the establishment of a new world order over this thing with Saddam. And he's used those words. This is not sinister. New world orders, if it were properly administered by a perfect human being or a perfect being of some sort, would be great. But none of us are perfect, and such a world order is doomed to failure. We can't use a democratic process or a Politburo because it takes too long. It's unwieldy to make quick decisions in today's rapidly changing circumstances. You can't have a dictator because they go crazy. After a period of time they grow old, they get senile, something goes wrong. We don't have any perfect beings, so I suppose we're faced with one of two choices. Either we put our faith in a real extraterrestrial group that comes down and says, we've got all the answers, and we say, we'll trust you, or we turn it over to a computer of our own making, and that can be, in fact, that would be even more disastrous, because computers that would have limited decision-making capability would be prone to psychotic behavior if they had more than one value judgment programmer. You get value collisions, and you'd develop a schizophrenic computer. So we can't have a world governed by something like that either. I suppose this is one of the reasons that my own research took me way back in time, looking for answers before modern history, looking in the surviving Sanskrit translations in India, looking in the Hebrew writings of Moses, looking in the writings of the Greeks, in particular of Plato and of Solon, and when they got theirs from the priests of Suez in Egypt. And there, using all these sources, I have managed to satisfy myself that a long time ago we were visited by non-human beings. They were super beings by comparison to us. In looking at the Mesopotamian Valley and in Ethiopia, where we have some of the oldest known remains and also the oldest known civilization or signs of civilization or cities, I was able to see that the unexplained jump in the Mesopotamian Valley from hunter-gatherer tribes to city dwellers who planted and cultivated and harvested and had electric battery power and had seagoing ships and metal alloying. This one generation virtually jump from primitive hunter-gatherers into developed civilization occurred because of a cross between off-worlders and the human indigenous species. It's in the Greek legends. The gods are quoted as breeding with humans and producing some pretty weird and wonderful offspring. Even in Genesis 6 in the Old Testament, in Moses' writing, in the Torah, it talks about the sons of God and the Nephilim, different kinds of beings which were down on the earth in those days, which had come down to the earth from a high place. and how they bred with the daughters of men on the planet, the Earth women, in other words, and how the unions, the offspring of these unions, were the heroes of ancient legend, meaning Greece and Rome. So when I discovered these things, I had to know more about things like the legend of Atlantis, and to my surprise, as I've explained in the second book, The Vindicator Scrolls, we did find Atlantis. We did find what I thought was a myth at one time, the Garden of Eden in Ethiopia, the breeding ground. And Atlantis itself fits exactly the description we got out of the Egyptians and out of Plato. As to size and location, we found the Pillars of Hercules, not at the gates of Gibraltar, Straits of Gibraltar, but the Pillars of Hercules are two great big mountain ranges, which are the Lebanon, anti-Lebanon mountain ranges in the Lebanon. And Saudi Arabia and all of the Saudi peninsula makes up the continent of Atlantis of the old days. The capital of Atlantis, the capital island, which was a much smaller thing, probably less than 10 kilometers in diameter, is still, for the most part, submerged in the Persian Gulf. And this in itself is quite ironic, because the legends say that the Atlantean people became so corrupt in their ways and thoughts and evil doing and all this kind of rubbish and warring with themselves and their neighbors that the gods were called to a meeting inside the earth, now I'm quoting Plato here, to decide the fate or the punishment of the Atlanteans. And certainly what happened was that there was a great shift in the Saudi plate, the tectonic plate, and it dipped into the Indian Ocean, or sorry, into the Persian Gulf side, started moving toward the Persian plate, and a large portion of it was underwater for so long that Egypt used to refer to the Mesopotamian Valley as the flood. My associates and I have found that references in the Torah to Noah and where he built his boat and how he built it out of what kind of materials led us to believe that Noah himself was a member of the Atlantean culture, and not just this spindly white-haired old guy out in the bush somewhere. He was quite a wealthy man, and he built quite a big boat. Friends of mine have gone over to Turkey and have analyzed what appears to be the fossilized ark on Mount Ararat, and have brought back samples of the pitch and various oxidized metal parts and hinges, which are right-angle hinges. And we found that one of the hinges had 93% iron, and some of that had not all that had oxidized, and 7% titanium. And we've just discovered titanium as a space-age metal in this generation. So 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, Noah and his culture had titanium-hardened steel. Found that passingly interesting. Now, going back to the New Testament, which is not a Hebrew writing, but written by Hebrews in Greek, in there it is told that great destruction is going to come upon the earth in the last days of this age, which I think we're in. And it says, during this time, it will be much like it was during the days of Noah just before the great flood, in that there would be a lot of chaos in the earth, a lot of people doing the wrong thing, and that there would be, we think it implies, in fact it says specifically in the Revelation, that there will be beings cast down to the earth from a high place as a result of a battle out there, not here. And it warns the people of earth to look out, because these beings are not going to be happy with us, I guess because we're going to be something like fodder to them. So that's in Revelation 12, I'm quoting from there. All these things fit into a very complex picture of the UFO situation, of the global so-called conspiracy, or the attempt to set up a global new world order by mankind, and the cover-up of the man-made UFO research programs, the squelching of it by some other unknown group. Now, I've certainly traveled around and met with people like Charles Berlitz, and discussed at length some of these things in their own research with Stanton Friedman, Dr. Friedman, with William H. Moore, with Bill Cooper, with the late J. Frank King, who was part of, in fact, a relative of Agnew Bonson, who funded the Townsend Brown research projects. I've gotten a hold of a lot of film material and lab notes from Townsend Brown, these electric flying discs in the late 50s, early 60s. I've talked to Townsend Brown and communicated with him on this subject. We've investigated the Philadelphia experiment and whether it did or did not happen. I've talked to now deceased members of the British Atomic Energy Command who were friends of Einstein's, who were aware of my research into these areas with the Philadelphia experiment. All of these things that I've researched do tend to point to the fact that we have been invaded. I don't know why at this point they're holding back revealing it. I've never seen a little green man or a little gray, no small gray, no large-nosed gray, no Nordics, none of the kinds that Bill Cooper and John Lear and some of them say they've seen or know about. I haven't seen any of them. Even if I had seen one, it doesn't exactly prove they're real and not some kind of a genetic experiment here. However, I personally think that they are real. I also think that we're going to have a very turbulent decade from now till about 2001, 2002. In fact, it may go on until about 2004 or 5 before it's finished. Perhaps part of the problem is that we do have weapons that are advanced enough to be a nuisance to these extraterrestrials who are here. It may be that they need us for some other purpose I'm not aware of, whether it be to support them industrially to figure out how to adapt their present bodies to this environment. Certainly that's been put forward by the Cooper papers as far as their dietary habits and their ability to reproduce. According to the biblical commentaries on this, they will be here to simply to destroy, to go about and just destroy us in their wrath because they've been defeated in another battle, perhaps in an upper dimension. I don't know how you explain it, but it's out there away from here. So we're faced with a very complex issue, and it's either going to have a very simple answer or a very complex one. I certainly opt for the simple solution, and even though I've opted for that, I still persist in looking at complicated issues within the problems we've got and short-term fixes for them like everyone else.